This is a Fox News Alert. I'm Brett Baer in Washington. We are awaiting new remarks from President Obama in Chicago, who's expected to once again appeal for calm in the wake of last night's grand jury decision not to indict a Ferguson, Missouri police officer for the shooting death of an unarmed African-American man. The president's first attempt last night failed to deter the violence. He'll be speaking to this audience in Chicago momentarily. Meanwhile, it's just past sunset in Ferguson, and both sides on the Michael Brown issue are bracing for possibly another night of protest and potential violence. Correspondent Mike Tobin is live tonight in Ferguson. Hello, Mike.
Hello, Brett. The violent scenes from last night in Ferguson cannot be repeated. Those words from Missouri Governor Jay Nixon, who, under criticism, is ramping up the National Guard presence from 700 troops to 2,200. Meantime, night falls and this town waits to see if people will riot again. Fire and mayhem overwhelmed the streets of Ferguson. Police used tear gas to disperse rioters, sending them scrambling as they smashed windows, looted stores, and some randomly fired guns in the air. This chaos, the most destructive since Michael Brown was shot.
In August, we talked about the out-of-towners came in and tore up our community. Well, our community's got to take some responsibility for what happened tonight.
People marched in Chicago, New York, and D.C. In Oakland, they lay in the streets simulating the death of Michael Brown. All of it an angry reaction to a grand jury decision clearing police officer Darren Wilson.
They determined that no probable cause exists to file any charge against Officer Wilson and returned a no true bill on each of the 5 indictments.
Subsequently, evidence was released showing the swollen face of Officer Wilson, a result of the beating he took from Brown, and Wilson's grand jury testimony describing Brown charging him and the fatal shots. He turns, and when he looked at me, he made a grunting like aggravated sound, and he turns, and he's coming toward me. I keep telling him to get on the ground. He doesn't. I shoot a series of shots. I don't know how many I shot. Last night, the president called for calm.
Those of you who are watching tonight understand that there's never an excuse for violence.
Everybody want me to be calm. Do you know how them bullets hit my son?
But with the encouragement of the angry mother of Michael Brown, rioters and vandals were already on the rampage when the president spoke. Small businesses along Florissant Avenue now lie in piles of ash and broken glass.
I have nowhere to work now. How can I feed my kids now? If I woke up, how can I feed my kids?
And Eric Holder, who has paid special attention to the Ferguson case, promises that it's not over. The federal government is still investigating.
The department's investigations will continue to be thorough, they will continue to be independent, and they remain ongoing. They will be conducted rigorously and in a timely manner.
There are 2 ongoing federal investigations. One looks at whether the civil rights of Michael Brown were violated when he was shot. The other looks into whether the Ferguson Police Department routinely engaged in racial profiling or the use of excessive force. Brett?
Mike Tobin live in Ferguson. Mike, thank you. As is often the case, many people are blaming the media, in part, for the violence in Ferguson. Tonight, Fox News media analyst and host of Fox's Media Buzz, Howard Kurtz, looks at whether that is justified.
Howard?
Well, Brett, it seems to me that the media narrative took a turn almost immediately when Darren Wilson shot Michael Brown. And let's take a look at that. The media narrative took hold almost immediately after Darren Wilson shot Michael Brown, that an unarmed young black man was likely murdered by an overzealous white cop. And last night, the St. Louis County prosecutor singled out the wall-to-wall coverage.
The most significant challenge encountered in this investigation has been the 24-hour news cycle and its insatiable appetite for something, for anything, to talk about.
Much of the media trumpeted accounts that turned out to be wrong, some of them from eyewitnesses who later changed their stories or admitted they hadn't seen the shooting.
As he got closer, he fired one more shot. That shot struck my friend in the back.
Then he turns around, faces the officer, and puts his hands up, and the officer continues to shoot him until he goes down to the ground.
And while some commentators cautioned against rushing to judgment, sometimes they couldn't help themselves.
To be clear, we need to hear from all the witnesses. But these two witnesses describe what seems to me to be a cold-blooded murder.
Other erroneous details? The Washington Post and FoxNews.com reported that Wilson had suffered a broken eye socket. The prosecutor says Wilson's face was swollen from the confrontation. MSNBC's Al Sharpton trumpeted the idea that no indictment meant no justice.
We don't want no double talking. We don't want no backsliding. We want to know where justice is.
Part of the problem, as Brown's grief-stricken parents gave interviews, neither Wilson nor the Ferguson police put out the officer's version of events. We didn't know until word eventually leaked that there'd been a struggle for Wilson's gun inside his police car. And as the riots erupted, it became a nightly reality show that was good for ratings.
Some journalists tried to stick to the facts of this tragedy or warned against reckless speculation, but they were often drowned out by accounts that we now know were marked by misinformation. Right?
How it seems Al Sharpton has played a significant role after this shooting. Let me stop you there. President Obama is just mentioning Ferguson. Let's listen in really quickly.
A grand jury made a decision yesterday that upset a lot of people. And as I said last night, the frustrations that we've seen are not just about a particular incident. They have deep roots in many communities of color who have a sense that our laws are not always being enforced uniformly or fairly. That may not be true everywhere, and it's certainly not true for the vast majority of law enforcement officials, but that's an impression that folks have, and it's not just made up. It's rooted in realities that have existed in this country for a long time. Now, as I said last night, there are productive ways of responding and expressing those frustrations, and there are destructive ways of responding. Burning buildings, torching cars, destroying property, putting people at risk, that's destructive, and there's no excuse for it. Those are criminal acts. And people should be prosecuted if they engage in criminal acts. But what we also saw, although it didn't get as much attention in the media, was people gathering in overwhelmingly peaceful protests here in Chicago and New York and Los Angeles, other cities. We've seen young people who are organizing and people beginning to have real conversations about how do we change the situation so that there's more trust between law enforcement and some of these communities. And those are necessary conversations to have. You know, we're here to talk about immigration, but part of what makes America this remarkable place is being American doesn't mean you have to look a certain way or have a certain last name or come from a certain place. It has to do with a commitment to ideals, a belief in certain values. And if any part of the American community doesn't feel welcomed or treated fairly, that's something that puts all of us at risk. And we all have to be concerned about it. So my message to those people who are constructively moving forward, trying to organize, mobilize, and ask hard, important questions about how we improve the situation, I want all those folks to know that their president is going to work with them. And I think you'll find a lot of separate and apart from the particular circumstances of Ferguson, which I am careful not to speak to because it's not my job as president to comment on ongoing investigations and specific cases, but the frustrations people have generally those are rooted in some hard truths that have to be addressed. And so those who are prepared to work constructively, your president will work with you. And a lot of folks, I believe, in law enforcement, and a lot of folks in city halls and governor's offices across the country want to work with you as well. So as part of that, I've instructed Attorney General Eric Holder not just to investigate what happened in Ferguson, but also identify specific steps we can take together to set up a series of regional meetings focused on building trust in our communities. And next week, we'll bring together state and local officials and law enforcement and community leaders and faith leaders to start identifying very specific steps that we can take to make sure that law enforcement is fair and is being applied equally to every person in this country. And we know certain things work. We know that if we train police properly, that improves policing and makes people feel that the system's fair. We know that when we have a police force that is representative of the communities it's serving, that makes a difference. We know that when there's clear accountability and transparency when something happens, that makes a difference. So there's specific things we can do. And the key now is for us to lift up the best practices and work city by city, state by state, county by county, all across this country, because the problem is not just a Ferguson problem, it is an American problem. And we've got to make sure that we are actually bringing about change. The bottom line is nothing of significance, nothing of benefit results from destructive acts. I've never seen a civil rights law or a health care bill or an immigration bill result because a car got burned. It happened because people vote. It happened because people mobilize. It happened because people organize. It happens because people look at what are the best policies to solve the problem. That's how you actually move something forward. So don't take the short-term easy route and just engage in destructive behavior. Take the long-term hard but lasting route of working with me and governors, officials to bring about some real change. And to those who think that what happened in Ferguson is an excuse for violence, I do not have any sympathy for that. I have no sympathy at all for destroying your own communities. But for the overwhelming majority of people who just feel frustrated and pained because they get a sense that maybe some communities aren't treated fairly or some individuals aren't seen as worthy as others, I understand that. And I want to work with you, and I want to move forward with you. Your president will be right there with you. All right? So that's what we need to focus on. Let's be constructive. Now, I appreciate your patience because I know you came here to talk about immigration, but this is relevant because part of what America's about is
President Obama in Chicago talking about the situation in Ferguson, urging calm, calling for calm, also mentioning that the federal investigation about Ferguson is still ongoing. He is saying that federal investigation is ongoing. He's bringing together officials from all over the country to talk about the situation in police stations, police departments around the country next week. Back with Howie Kurtz here.